Hi, everyone. This is Nina Zolotow, the editor-in-chief of the Yoga for Healthy Aging blog. And today I'm going to be talking to yoga teacher Leslie Howard about yoga for menopause. So let's start, Leslie, by having you tell us a little bit about yourself for those of you who don't, who don't know you yet.
Well, my name is Leslie Howard. Thank you for having me. And I'm probably best known for my work with yoga for the pelvic floor. So it seemed like a natural extension to teach about menopause, but I've been teaching for 25 years and I've studied pretty much exclusively in the Iyengar method. But I am not a certified Iyengar teacher because I like to bring other things in, but I would say that my love is therapeutics and helping people out of pain and suffering. And I have a lot of online classes, and I have a book, and I teach classes on Zoom and in person. And yeah, so I think you saw that I was teaching a thing on menopause and reached out to talk to me.
Yes, I know it's a popular topic on our blog, and we have written about it, but it's in the pretty distant past already. And, you may have new insights that you can share with people. So I thought it was time to revisit the topic. So you mentioned briefly the relationship of menopause to your studies on the pelvic floor, but would you like to say anything more about why you decided to dive deep into this topic with a 10-hour course on yoga for
Well, a
menopause?
couple reasons. A couple of reasons. So, with my pelvic floor work, obviously people are having more issues, or maybe it's not obvious, but people tend to have more issues with their pelvic floor as they age, and particularly women, when they go through menopause, they get hit with like a quadruple whammy of things to deal with. And a lot of times pelvic floor problems show up around menopause or after menopause. And that's for a variety of reasons. So that's number one. Number two is there have been a few enlightened doctors that love to offer alternative therapies to their patients. And I had this wonderful gynecologist named Dr. Deborah Feltman out of Chicago. She came to my pelvic floor training many, many years ago, and we've struck up a friendship. And over the years, we talk about everything pelvic. And she's actually the one, she's also a certified Iyengar teacher. And, or she may not be certified actually, sorry, but she's a very dedicated Iyengar teacher. And she approached me and said, I'm a grandmother now, and I think you need to teach something about menopause and postmenopause. And I was like, okay, what do you think I should teach? And she said, well, you're just so good at figuring all the yoga stuff out, but I could actually, maybe I could do a little chat on the anatomy. And then it kind of evolved from there. So now we do this course on menstruation, menopause, and postmenopause, the transitions of the pelvis. And that's how it came to be. So she does a small anatomy talk, and then we do a practice, and then we do another anatomy talk, and then a practice. So she talks about the science and in a very accessible way to how our bodies are changing in these times.
That's a wonderful story. That's great that you have that collaborator. Now, I'm going to ask you a question that wasn't on the list because I'm really interested in the idea of what you said about the relationship between menopause and pelvic floor problems. Could you address that briefly?
Yeah, so a couple things that probably not everybody knows about menopause. I mean, people know, okay, I stopped bleeding, but what else? So one thing that happens is the uterus actually shrinks about 25%. So that's, a quarter of its size. And so many women might have a very minor prolapse, meaning one of the organs is not in its correct place. It might be falling just slightly. There's 4 stages of them. But let's say you had a stage 1 that wasn't so bad, didn't even notice it. But then your uterus shrinks, and then the uterus is actually helping to support the rectum and the bladder. And so that might precipitate a little bit more issue with the prolapse. That would be one issue. Once we go through menopause, we have less collagen. So we lose a little bit, I like to call it our little Elizabeth, we lose a little bit of our fluffiness in our muscles. We get different kinds of fluffiness. And so that's another issue. Okay, so the pelvic floor muscles are another integral part of the support of those organs. So now you've got a smaller organ, so less support of the organs supporting each other. So they kind of lean against each other. So they're supporting each other, you know, kind of leaning into each other, and then like one gets smaller, so maybe there's a falling. So then you add that to the muscles aren't as toned as they used to be. And then you add on to that the loss of estrogen and progesterone, and people start having incontinence or a bladder prolapse or a uterine prolapse, or sex starts to become painful. So, you know, it's like I said, a quadruple whammy.
That's really interesting. Those are all things that I hadn't really thought about before. So seems really important. And I mean, are those things that you are going to address in your course besides also your other course? That's great, because I think there's going to be people interested in that right away. And all right, so besides those issues, what are some other issues that people going through menopause
Well,
have
in
to
our
do?
course, in the menopause section, we decided to focus on the top 3 complaints of people that we hear from in the United States. I know it can be different in other countries. But the top issue was hot flashes. The second issue was insomnia, anxiety, kind of emotional imbalance. And then the third topic was what I call vaginal vitality, or the loss thereof. So those are the 3 issues that Deborah talks about in a scientific way, and I address in a yoga way.
Yeah, that does seem really helpful. And, you know, it is true that they're different seems, and, you know, I don't even know why that is, but that the complaints seem to be different in different countries or different cultures. So because,
I
I
did read
look,
one study, and I might be able to scrape it up for you to post. I'll look for it. But I did read one study that talked about the cross-cultural differences of how the entire culture views menopause differently. And I can't remember, I think it may have been China, where menopause, the word for menopause is second spring, and that it's viewed as this liberation from many of the things that can keep you tethered to the home. And so it's more celebrated. Whereas in the United States, it's considered a negative thing. Oh my God, I'm getting older. And, you know, there's this constant chasing of youth. And so it's considered kind of a negative thing in the United States, not a liberation from the tyranny of our hormones, I say. You know, I mean, haven't we all made really like not the best decisions based on hormones? I know I have, I'll just say it.
you and I talked about that when we were just hanging out as friends recently. So yeah, I really like this idea of the second spring, and that would be a great blog post. To try to do that.
Yeah. There's lots of things to celebrate about not menstruating anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So we've got your top 3 in the US. And how was your personal experience?
I would say I was hit with all 3 of those. So I can speak from my own experience. I definitely had a lot of hot flashes. And I did a lot of research on what's the best thing for hot flashes. And, you know, what when I teach my menopause course, I say, you know, the one thing you can bet on is everyone's menopause is really different. So for instance, you know, my best friend, you know, we call each other our sisters, even though we're not related. When she was going through menopause, I was like, oh, this helped me and this helped me and this helped me. She tried everything that helped me and didn't help her. And so, you know, I tell people they must experiment. But I read a really important study that said the single most important thing that helped hot flashes was a deep breathing practice.
Interesting.
And I was like,
I hadn't heard about it, so that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I also had hot flashes and some insomnia, and fatigue attacks is what I call it. So that was a big one for me. So I was able to work with the fatigue. I didn't really find that much that helped with the hot flashes. So, but I didn't know about the deep breathing thing. And so
Yeah, deep breathing, and then there are some things, some small things you can do that that helped me, and I know now that I've taught it enough times that it's helped other people's. There's certain mudras that can help cool us down. There's certain breathing practices that can cool us down. So there's the regular breath practice to minimize overall the hot flashes, but then there's what do I do when I'm having one? And there are actually things you can do to mitigate it, to make it either shorter or less intense.
oh, that's great. Those would be great tips for sure. Um, so one thing I noticed about your course is you have this idea about slowing down at the start of menopause, perimenopause.
Yeah.
So maybe so I was just so interested in hear you talk about that a little bit.
Well, you mentioned fatigue and how many people really realize, wow, I cannot do what I used to do. And I think modern life, as much as paradoxically, we're supposed to be doing things that save time all the time. Like think of our modern appliances. It's supposed to save us all this time, but nobody has any time. Everybody seems completely overwhelmed. And when we're going through menopause or the beginning, perimenopause, when symptoms are starting to show up, the body's going through something big, and it takes energy. So, it's like, think about an adolescent, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of descriptions of menopause as just like a similar thing of going through adolescence. And when you go through puberty, it's a thing where people sleep more. Boys and girls sleep more because it actually takes energy. And so this is just another time of transition that your body needs more energy to be doing things internally. So we don't have the external energy that we're used to have.
Oh, that's a really good way to look at it, and a really, really important point. Um, so yeah, I mean, I did acknowledge what I was feeling, and I did change my yoga practice at the time to be more restful and less physically demanding and so on.
Yeah.
But yeah, knowing the reasons behind things is helpful too, because then you don't, like, if there's a lot, like you mentioned, a logical reason behind something, then it doesn't feel so burdensome in a way to me. I mean, it's like, oh, this is what's happening with my body and I need to address it, not like just these are a bunch of annoying things that are happening to me. Why?
And there again is the labeling, like, how do we look at it? That's so much a part of it. Yeah. And then, I say it a lot in my classes that yoga is an energy management system. And so if we're going through a time where our inner body is needing more energy, that we can't do more outward things, well, how do we adjust our practice for those times so that our practice isn't taking more of our energy, it's actually giving us energy? And that can vary. There's general things that I see, like generally forward bends can help people, but for some people, backward bends. So again, it's not just a one size fits all. There has to be
I mean, if anyone who knows me at this point knows that's actually my orientation to yoga for anything.
Yes. Right.
And that my motto is, if it's not working for you, it's not working for you. So yeah, you can get a suggestion, like your friend took all your suggestions.
Yes.
And they didn't work for her. So then she needs to, try some other things to find out what works for her. And so that's super important. I mean, I think somebody actually wrote to me something about that. Could you please just give me a sequence for X? Like, and I had to write back and say, well, yeah, that would be nice if there was one sequence that helped everybody with that problem.
Right.
But that isn't actually how it works, unfortunately.
Yeah, we just want the answer. Can you just give me the answer?
I just want to practice. I don't want to have to read and think too hard about this. But so yeah, it's important for people to be motivated to go in with the right approach and try things. And if they don't work, just let them go and try something else. And so it's great you're offering a lot of alternatives.
It's also a great time, if your body's saying slow down, slowing down in your yoga practice can give you so many insights. Like, on a more micro level of how am I managing my energy? It's like, what happens if I'm in plank position, let's say, and I'm more forward and I'm more back, and like taking like little mini adjustments and saying, do I get more support here or do I get more support here? And like I feel like that's a very beautiful template for our lives, like where we need support. We all need support. So like in your yoga practice, are you doing it in a way that's throwing your energy out in a non-efficient way? Or are you working in a way where it's giving it back? And then can you take that idea into your life?
That sounds great. I'm going to ask another question I didn't have on the list because I'm just getting interested in all this. Do you think there's a relationship between, because when you're mentioning the breath practices and hot flashes, is there a relationship between stress and the intensity of some of the symptoms we're talking about, like hot flashes? Like,
Definitely. I mean, going back to what I was saying about deep breathing helping hot flashes, when we're stressed, our respiration shortens. So then we're not breathing in the most efficient way. Think about, just driving home from something and you get cut off, right? What's the first thing you do? You go, right? And so you're doing a reverse breathing practice that, makes your whole body, up on alert, like warning, warning, warning. So your body's up on alert. Well, that takes energy.
oh yeah, definitely. Being in stress mode takes energy because you're preparing to fight.
Correct. Right. Yes.
Or flee.
Yes.
Your energy is getting rubbed up and your oxygen intake actually increases. So, but you're breathing faster, which is very
right. So you're not using it efficiently.
Stimulating to your nervous system and all that. So yeah, I mean, that's just interesting to try to think about, if yeah, and then also maybe your attitude towards the symptoms like hot flashes, which are annoying, but they're not dangerous, right? So you're not going through anything that's like, heart attack or something.
No, you just feel that way.
So possibly the attitude that you bring to it also might help with the severity of the symptom. Like if you just like, oh, like I really tried to bring a attitude of curiosity to mine. And so especially when they woke me up in the middle of the night. And so then that was something else, getting to sleep after, which I used my yoga for insomnia techniques to get to sleep. So I didn't really have that much disruption. But when I would have the hot flash, when I'd feel it coming on, I would just be like kind of, oh, this is weird. It feels sort of like surfing. I don't know. I would like get these weird images in my mind and I would just, like feel it and go through it instead of like getting upset because I was awake and it was happening. So
right.
yeah.
Right. I would, to put another positive spin on it, I was actually one of those people that was cold all the time. All the time. I just never had enough warm clothing. I never, the heat, my brother used to tease me when he'd come to my house. He'd be like, oh, live in an incubator? Like what is wrong with you? But now that I've gone through menopause, I actually run a little warmer and I actually prefer it because I'm not always like, I don't always have my jacket on in the house, it's like I can sleep with an open window like for the first time in my life, and that actually feels really nice. So there, I mean, I'm not saying I love having hot flashes, but it's just kind of changed my whole like base temperature.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I had a whole list of things that we might go through, but we wanted to wrap up after about a half an hour. So first I'll just say, is there anything else that you think is important that you want to talk about before we finish up?
Well, the one thing we really didn't talk about, we talked a little bit about hot flashes, a little bit about insomnia, but the vaginal infertility thing is
right. Yeah.
some of the stuff that I learned with healing my own pelvis. So it's changing a lot, but it's still out there quite a bit that if you're getting older, your pelvic floor is getting loose, and that is just not the case. So it's sometimes some women as they age actually start to tighten. And so sex can be painful because of many reasons. It can be, lack of hormones, lack of lubrication, the vaginal walls change when we go through menopause. So they naturally, through our adult life, have what's called rugae, which are, kind of this expandability thing that they have, so that babies' heads can go through and things can come up in there too. But as you go through menopause, the rugae smooths out, and then your vagina isn't as flexible. So one of the things that you can do is, I'm a big advocate of internal massage for the pelvic floor. So that's something that we go through in the course. And it's something that a pelvic floor physical therapist can help you with much more than I'm explaining it with a model. But it's something that you can do, and it shouldn't be taboo, and it's really not dangerous in any way. As well as doing targeted yoga poses for the pelvic floor, like things that, like if you're experiencing too much tension in your pelvic floor, you want to work on poses that stretch it out.
Mhm.
Think like a squat. Squat is really, really stretching your pelvic floor. Now, on the other hand, let's say you've had a couple children and you're not really that athletic, and maybe your pelvic floor is more on the lax tone, and you go through menopause and then it's even more lax because of some of the things I mentioned earlier. Well, then you might want to focus your yoga on poses that are externally rotating your thighs, think like triangle pose, warrior two pose. And those are poses that are going to bring your pelvic floor into a more contracted place, as well as working on, I hate the word working on your core, because it's just like become meaningless, but the beginning of your pelvic floor is, the beginning of your core is your pelvic floor. It starts with your pelvic floor. So if your pelvic floor is healthy, it should just engage when you do core work. But for people who have a lax pelvic floor, they have to retrain those muscles to strengthen again. So this is how you can really make your yoga practice targeted for whatever is, I always say, like, what's your dominant symptom? Is it the hot flashes that are making you insane? Well, do more deep breathing practice and poses, restorative poses that help you breathe more deeply and efficiently and slowly. If it's insomnia and anxiousness, for most people, forward bending practices, but not everybody, as we talked about. And then for vaginal vitality, again, you can cater some of your practices to the pelvic floor that you have.
I think what you said was really important, especially about the whole myth that for menopause, it always brings on a loose, lax, weak pelvic floor, when in fact, sometimes tightness is the problem. So,
and I want to just amend something you said, is tight is weak also. So it is weakness, but people don't think of tight as weak. So people think, I'm incontinent, I'm leaking.
yeah,
That must mean something is loose. I get it. Like a faucet is loose if it's leaking, right?
right.
But we're human beings. So if the pelvic floor is too tight, it actually can cause incontinence. And that is kind of a like, what? Like people are surprised to hear that.
So I assume that in your course you talk about like how to tell whether your issue is tightness or laxness. Yeah, that seems really important.
Yeah. And it's not that I'm going to say one last thing and I'll be quiet because I know we're at time. But if tightness is the issue, you always have to address that first. So if your pelvic floor is too tight, you have to address getting it to let go a little bit. And the analogy I always use is if I'm not happy with how my bicep strength is and it's stuck like this, I can't do bicep curls to make it stronger. I first have to get it to let go. So think of that. If the pelvic floor is too tight, first you have to get it to let go so that you can reteach it to engage properly. Some of us are, and totally understandably, the world is crazy right now. So what are a lot of us are like walking around bracing all the time. You listen to the news and it's like, well, that can, depending on the body you have, that can overactivate your pelvic floor. So your pelvic floor is overly elevated and not helping you.
That's really interesting. All right, so we agreed we were gonna not talk more than a half an hour. It sounds like we could go on for about 2, but we'll,
Good.
we'll try to wrap up now. And so why don't you say a little bit about your online course? Because I think that people are going to be interested in that.
Okay, so the course that I do with Dr. Deb Feltman, she's an OBGYN, it's called Menarche to Matriarch, and it's a 3-part workshop, but we've broken it up into doable chunks because we know like doing things online is harder. So, you can listen to Deb for 20 minutes and then go take a break. And then there's a practice for that. And then she'll talk a little bit and then there's a practice, and it's got quizzes. If you're interested in that, you don't have to do it. Some people are doing it for continuing ed, but some people are just doing it for symptoms. And so that's how we've broken it up, and it's an on-demand course. So, and I'm going to offer your readers a discount for the course. And then I also, I'm just going to mention, because we talked about this, is I have another course coming up at Nest Yoga on incontinence and stability for the pelvic floor. So that's something else that people might want to look into.
And that's on your website?
It is, and my website is lesliehowardyoga.com.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. This is really fun.
Good conversation.
Yeah, totally. I agree.
And maybe we can talk again in the future about some other relevant topics.
That sounds great. Thanks, Nina.